This is just ridiculous at this point, as more reports from insiders have come out revealing more insight into Sidney Crosby's future as a Pittsburgh Penguin. And some of the details in these reports will have Penguins fans absolutely fired up for all the wrong reasons. We're going to break that all down in this episode of Penguins Digest, as well as some other updates as it pertains to Kyle Dubas and his plans for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But before we get into all of that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the Pittsburgh Penguins, go down below, hit that free subscribe button, because this is the place to be for all your daily Pittsburgh Penguins news. But Nick, let's get right into it. The first thing I want to start with is actually a feel-good story and some good news on the Pittsburgh Penguins front and Sidney Crosby. And let's dive right into it. Good guy, Sidney Crosby. I thought this was a really cool story. And before we get into, as it pertains to his future, everything that's happening with that, obviously his former equipment manager, Paul DeFazio, is interviewing or was interviewing for a job with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and Sidney Crosby called Blue Jackets general manager and Rick Nash as well to let them know, yeah, you should definitely hire this guy. He's great at his job. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically Sid just called and said, I'm going to miss him, but he does a really good job and he works really hard. So any thoughts on this quickly before we move on? I thought this was just a really cool story in the middle of the summer that, this is the pull that Sidney Crosby has around the league.
I mean, it's just, what everything we already knew about Sid. He's a good guy. He kind of keeps to himself. You don't really hear many stories about Sidney Crosby, but I feel like whenever we do hear stories about Sid, it's like barely hockey related. It's just like him being a good dude, suggesting. It's just a good move all around. It's something he doesn't have to do, and I think that's just Sidney Crosby. Like his leadership, his talent, his the way he goes about things personified. If we want to take it to like a bird's eye view section here. So yeah, I mean, it's a cool story, but Darius, we want to start this off on a good note, because the fans are going to be a little bit perturbed about what the rumors that are coming out about both Crosby and a little bit about Evgeni Malkin as well. So what do we have on that?
And let's get right into that. We have a bunch of rumors and reports from different insiders on Sidney Crosby, and Greg Wyshynski coming out and saying he's heard from too many people that kind of know him and know the situation, that he'll be there as long as Evgeni Malkin is there. And we kind of touched on this a little bit in a previous video, but I really wanted to deep dive into this one because there was a report earlier this season. I want your thoughts on this too. Not even earlier this season, sorry. Earlier this offseason, that Evgeni Malkin won't be re-signed by Kyle Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he will be let go at the end of this season and either retire or move on to the KHL. That's kind of the sentiment right now. We don't know exactly what Malkin's plans are from his camp side of things, but that is a report at this point. So if Sidney Crosby is going to go when Evgeni Malkin goes, we got one season left of Sidney Crosby. Now I think there's an interesting little thing to this that Elliot Friedman's also reporting that there's people in Crosby's orbit that want him to go. They want him to go win another Stanley Cup. I know this is going to really, for lack of a better term, piss Penguins fans off, because you don't want this guy to leave, and I don't think he should leave the organization from a selfish point of view, for the organization to teach some of the younger guys like the leadership qualities we were talking about earlier just a couple minutes ago. But selfishly, I don't think this player should leave, but it sounds like, there is some smoke here at this point. And if the team doesn't improve very quickly, he's not getting any younger. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you think if Malkin goes, Crosby also goes? Because that's signaling to the end of this season.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, it's certainly an interesting take on it. Like, they seem like they're a package in terms of what's going to happen with Pittsburgh, because, it really is the Crosby Malkin era, right? At the end of the day, with how many cups they won and the MVPs and the All-Stars and the Hart trophies and the, all those trophies. I could go on forever and ever. Like, those guys are, Hall of Famers right when they retire, first ballot, going to be, cemented in hockey history and already are. So I could see it making sense that, once Malkin leaves, like, is that kind of Penguins era over? There's been so many reports about all of this happening. As you have up there, the agent's going to do what the agent does. Try not to create speculation as much as he can, unless, Crosby wants it to happen, of course. But I know Penguins fans have been getting, a little bit mad at us in the comments about, hey, Sidney Crosby's not going to leave, but we are only talking about what the reports say. We're not making any of this stuff up. It's all, valid reports from people in the hockey sphere that are, most of the time pretty trustable and credible. So I could definitely see this happening. I think Malkin could go, even this trade deadline, if they retain a little bit on his contract, even with this contract, it's 1 year left. Like I think we were talking about this a little bit, Darius. Like the Florida Panthers make a lot of sense for a guy like Evgeni Malkin. We've seen guys like Marchand and Tarasenko go over there, win cups, and kind of revitalize their careers. The weather's very, very nice there. It's a nice place to play. They have created a culture of winning. And on the Crosby side of things, that Montreal Colorado open window is still very open. Yep. So there's a lot of moving parts happening here. I don't know if Crosby. I could see Malkin moving on. More likely than Sid would, just because Malkin's stats have kind of tailed off. He's not that point a game electric type of player that he used to be. Crosby's still an elite talent, a 90-point player. So I could see the Penguins wanting to keep him. But there is, from your point of view, who do you think is more likely to move, and how imminent do you think these moves could actually be?
You bring up an interesting point about Evgeni Malkin, and I wanted to bring this up because if you take a look at the lineup here, there would be a gigantic hole, that is for sure, but there would be a huge hole if you're missing two of them at once. So I think it is Malkin. I think it's him first, and it's not him just not renewing his contract. I do think that the Penguins will miss the playoffs again, and I feel like most fans know that that's a realistic outcome, logical outcome for this coming season. If you take a look at the salary cap structure, they can retain a lot of salary, the Pittsburgh Penguins. You have a lot of cap space. You have money coming off the books as well in just a year's time, so keep that in mind that they're not necessarily strapped or anything like that. They have a lot of flexibility. If you look at Malkin, like his point production has taken quite a dip, like considering what we know him to be. 50 points in 68 games is not horrible, I guess, especially for a guy his age, right? He's not like an ancient dinosaur or anything like that, but like for a guy his age, like that point production is not horrible, but it's certainly taken a dip. So I wonder if there's a conversation at the deadline where the Penguins are going to miss the playoffs, and I want your thoughts on this too. The Penguins are going to miss the playoffs. As Kyle Dubas, you go to Malkin, you go, listen, it's no surprise. We're not going to be re-signing you. Do you want to go to Florida? Do you want to go somewhere else where you can go win one last cup? And if you want to retire, you can retire. Or if you go to the KHL after, you go there. Whatever you want to do. But we're going to help you go to another team, and we'll get assets in return. And it would be great for the Pittsburgh Penguins, right, that you get something for Malkin. So I feel like Malkin at the trade deadline is a very real possibility. Crosby in season, I don't think is a possibility. I think if Crosby is going to be moved, it's actually going to be next offseason, and it really depends on if the Penguins get Gavin McKenna or not, because if they do, I think Crosby would find a new purpose in staying here with the Penguins and want to, show him the way like Mario did for him and just pass the torch on like Mario did for him instead of leaving to win another cup as well. So again, different situations, of course. Crosby's putting up crazy points still at his age, but what are your thoughts on that? I think it's Malkin. It's very likely. I think it's at the trade deadline, and if Crosby moves, it's going to be next offseason, and it's because they don't have a generational talent in the pipeline for him.
Yeah, and I think like the Malkin leaving does kind of impact things so heavily because, obviously if he does get traded, the Penguins are going to be even worse, which could put them in a better position to select first overall next offseason all the way in June of 2026, of course. But again, if they don't get him, Crosby might be more inclined to leave. With respect to the McGrody's and the Kindles and the Horkoffs of the world, these are not generational talents. They're just not, they're good players, and I think they're going to be very solid NHL players that carve out good careers, but that's not what the Penguins are looking for. They've had generational talents in Crosby and Malkin. I would argue both of them have been, Malkin has won MVPs in his days. I think he's in the latter half of his career, he became a little bit underrated. People forgot how good he actually was at one point. Generational talent. I think if Sidney Crosby's not there, Malkin's pinnacle number one center. Right. But it's just like Malkin, again, we looked at the stats. He has tailed off a little bit. I can see him going to Dubas, or Dubas going to be like, I want these few teams. I think Dubas, he's known for doing right by his players, no matter how good or bad they are. To his maybe to his detriment at points. But I think with a guy like, we saw it with Marchand. Marchand was like, I want to get traded, send me to Florida, and that's what they did. And I think Florida is becoming a hub for these older players. But I could even see him going to the Rangers, the New York Rangers, because they've I don't know if you've noticed, but they've been historically linked to Malkin every now and then.
Yep.
That this has been a thing that's been happening. Even someone like Dallas, I could see looking at him because they're going to be in a cap crunch and they could use a 1 year stopgap. depending on what goes on there at the trade deadline. I think trading Malkin honestly is going to be easier than trading Sidney Crosby on the fan base, PR wise. Fans obviously love Evgeni Malkin, but I think they love Sidney Crosby just a little bit more. No disrespect, of course, to Malkin, but Malkin's a little bit worse now. I think fans are also holding on to Crosby a little more because he's still a top 10 NHL center. So if you can move on from Malkin, get some stuff back for him, do right by him, I think the fans will be more accepting of that because he is in the tail half of his career. The reports of him leaving after this contract, or he's not going to re-sign, can soften the blow a little. With Crosby, it just seems like it's a little bit more emotional investment than it is just a business.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point with Malkin. And even, he was one of my favorite players growing up, and I know a lot of people might wince at that and be like, growing up, we get a lot of that, right? But, one of my favorite players growing up, but I think that sometimes, we see it across the league spanning 30 years at this point, like resentment builds up for management and some players that don't end up, doing this at the end of their career. So I think that, if it does end up helping the Penguins and by way of, getting assets and listen, we're not re-signing you anyway, no disrespect, all of those things, we have to move in a different direction, then I think that the fans would be a little bit more open to it. But we want to hear what you have to say about that in the comments. So let us know how you feel about that down below, because there's a lot of, it's almost ridiculous at this point, like how much we're hearing about Sidney Crosby and Malkin. And bring up a good point too about the Rangers. Mika Zibanejad's moving to the wing, so they need another natural center. So that could make some sense. And they want to make some noise in the playoffs again. I don't know if that makes sense for them, but nonetheless, let us know how you feel in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.